Hey guys, Nicole Leanne here with Holistic Vitality. Today, I had some topics I wanted to discuss that has kind of come up in the last, I would say, 2 weeks of my experiences, whether personal or that which I've learned through facilitating shamanic journeys for clients. The themes of today's discussion is regarding shamanism, entities, and the influence of the Om mantra. Now, I've learned a lot more than just this, but I feel like if I wanted to really cover everything I've been learning, which is a lot to process, it would probably take a couple hours of discussion in a video. So I'm trying to limit it to these topics. I'll do my best to do so. First and foremost, let's talk more about the role of shamanism. This is, I think, a confusing topic for most people as to what is shamanism and who is allowed to consider themselves a shaman. And of course, if you're going by perspectives of certain indigenous shamans, they might have perspectives on this as well. So I'm going to do my best to speak from, I guess, what I've learned, and also learning to own this role for myself as what's being communicated to me, and I guess what it is that I am technically facilitating with my healing journeys for clients that I lead them into. Shamanism is a large part the ability to access healing not only in the physical realm, but by accessing it through the spirit realm, where there is non-physical experiences, if you will. So lots can be explored from the perspective of the non-physical dimensions. And so I believe different shamans might have different ways of accessing this, whether they may journey on behalf of the client, where they go into, say, a vision quest to help assist the person that they're trying to heal. I know that there are those types of shamans that do that. Then some shamans might work with plant medicines and ceremonies, but I think what's being communicated to, just because they facilitate medicine, doesn't always mean that they are actually true shamans, where they can go into the spirit realm and actually do work on that level. So that's something that's kind of come into my awareness as well. And something that's been channeled through one of my clients from the spirit realm as to understanding shamanism. And what was communicated was they were saying that shamanism, plain and simple, is being a portal to allow healing to come through from spirit realm as well. So it's merely learning to get out of your own egoic way in order to be a vessel for healing. So kind of being a portal for that. Now, a lot of people do have egos, and I feel like a lot of those that consider themselves to be shamans do have egos, and I wouldn't deny that I have an ego as well. But anyways, how that shows up is different, I guess, for each person. As far as, I guess, what I've learned, because recently, my own exploration, because I've been seeking, or was seeking, someone to be able to facilitate similarly to what I facilitate, because I was seeking healing for myself as well. And the way I facilitate is I lead my clients into an astral state to connect to the spirit realms for themselves, which is something I was guided into by my higher guides on how to do this. So it's not something that I studied under another individual or another self-proclaimed shaman to teach me how to have others access this. In fact, it was channeled to me, and I was guided into it on how to guide others to access that healing. And so it's been a very amazing journey for myself, because I've been evolving in my understanding as I go as well, because many times connect to not only for their own healing journey, but there's a lot of information that the spirit realm will communicate back to me as they are also teaching me, which has been really cool. But even with that, a big part of, I guess, what I've been seeking all my life, besides what I mentioned just a second ago, where I was seeking kind of healing, I wanted somebody to help me connect on that level by leading me. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I don't have the best reception in my office. So anyways, I think what I was saying was I've been seeking similarly someone to help me access my own shadows or my own healing similarly to the way I guess I do it. And anyways, outside of that, I've been, where was my thought process going? So we're talking about shamanism and what I've been learning. So on my journey, my whole life, I would say my biggest question and my biggest seeking has been to figure out, who am I? You know, which I've been able to get glimpses of in this healing modality that I've kind of been guided into, if you will, in helping others access that for themselves. And so I will get like snippets of me, of being able to see me, but it's always been through the lens of others. And really what it's been is me failing to see myself, and me failing to really own my own power and identify myself even as a shaman, which I've hesitated from ever doing, even though sure, I've been guided into identifying the work as shamanic journey work, but I've still not identified myself as a shaman. And I think largely that reason was because I didn't have the experience of owning that for myself outside of what obviously has been communicated to me many times, of course. But again, I was still failing to see that for myself experientially. And sure, I've done many plant medicine journeys and worked with some other healers as well. But in my seeking, and through some of the channels that has kind of been received, including steering me away from certain medicines and certain circles for specific reasons, which is for another discussion. But with that, the messaging was telling me, don't chase the medicine will find me. And anyways, recently I had a curandera, or self-proclaimed curandera shaman, reach out to me saying that he knows me from the spirit realm and that he's meant to work with me and he's meant to help me and what have you. So of course that kind of got me excited, even though he facilitates through a different medicine that I've plant medicine, if you will, that I've worked with previously in this manner. And so that got me curious. So we ended up hosting about a week and a half ago a ceremony at my space where we had different people come into it who were also seeking healing. And this particular shaman had many bold claims, some of it that, you know, resonated as far as truths that I've come into through the information that has already been shared with me. But there was a lot of bold claims that he was saying that was also red flagging me. And so I went to seek out my own guidance and channeling that information to kind of see what the validity of his claims were. And what I learned in this particular shaman's case is that, because he deals, I guess, primarily with entities, and he considers himself, like he really refers to the training of him and his people, his tribe, and he's a warrior, and he goes into the spirit realm, and he goes to war with entities and what have you. And sure, there's a lot of things that I believe he believes to be true based on his experiences. And but what I got into communication with understanding from my guidance, or the guidance that was shared with me, is that he worked primarily in the underworld, and that's why he primarily deals with entities, whereas I myself facilitate more from the higher realms, so where we consider it more beings of light. So when I bring in assistance in any of the journeys that we lead people to, we're essentially working with the higher realms. So that would be working with, like, say, your guides, your angels, your guardians, your loved ones, who are essentially assisting from the spirit realm that you may or may not be aware of due to maybe human limitations. So anyways, we had this journey here, and he had a big ego, which is one of the things that I was kind of resistant with, and some of the things that I was channeled, but I still decided to go through with the ceremony, even though there was a lot of intuitive factors that were saying, like, be careful with this particular shaman. Anyways, I went against some of these intuitive factors because my curiosity had the best of me, and I really wanted to see what this person brought to the table, experience. The room was dark, and sure enough, there were a couple people that were really actually dealing with entities. One of them was yelling and screaming at the entity, and the other one was having a whole dissociative experience with it in her own world of, arguing with where her traumas originated from sexual trauma as a child, where I guess this entity garnered influence, where this entity's, as I repeat because my internet keeps cutting out, sorry, but this entity garnered influence in her reality because she was in a vibrational space due to the traumas she experienced. So even though my facilitating and the experiences that I've worked with comes from another angle and from a higher perspective, that's not to ignore that just as much as there are light beings, there is the influence of malevolent energies, those that don't have good intentions for you, and in fact can attach to you and influence you, whether through your thought patterns or your reactions or your experiences. Although one thing that needs to be made clear is that you have free will, but these entities have trickery in how to garner your permission as to how they may attach to you, whether to your knowledge or not, as far as your awareness is concerned. So I've kind of been learning a little bit about this because it seems like I'm being guided to assist since the ceremony, since this keeps coming up now, and even the clients that are coming to me and what we've experienced. So it seems like I'm being guided to help in this manner as well, to help people with entity attachments and where they originated. Because again, healing is always at the source of the origin of where it started, including healing at the source of the trauma. Anything is really related to what caused it. Where did it start? So, and this thing is also relevant to how an entity may have attached to you in the first place. You really want to go to where did it start. So anyways, in this particular ceremony that we hosted here, I did gain a lot from this experience because I learned a lot about myself. Whereas I feel like a lot of people were experiencing shadow work and, like I said, working with entities and whatever else they were processing. But for myself, it it was very much self-discovery, and where it downloaded to me and showed me like my truth as needing to own this identity as being a shaman, which again is still kind of still feels unfamiliar to some ways for me as far as owning that as a part of my identity. But it was so empowering to see it and experience it for myself. And also I learned that I'm my own authority, meaning my truth to be derived from my own authority, and I decide what my truth is. And I was realizing this as the shaman, he was projecting a lot of things onto me, like telling me to surrender these entities, when like in the meanwhile it was just my back was hurting. And he was like, what are you going through? And I'm like, my back's really hurting, which tends to happen to me when I work with plant medicines, is my back flares up into a lot of pain. This has been kind of consistent for the last year or two. So anyway, sure enough, my back was hurting, and he's like, oh, get rid of these entities, because he was kind of projecting that as everybody's experience, because maybe that's what he primarily deals with. But what I learned is that wasn't my truth anyways. And some of the things he was projecting onto me as what he believed to be truth wasn't my truth. So it was kind of like owning my own authority, and not just with him, but in general, with anybody else that might project things. It was very empowering for me to realize I decide what my truth is, nobody else, unless I allow their projection to become my truth. Then of course, then it's possible to own that. But again, that wouldn't be my own authentic truth if I adopted it from someone else. So similarly, whatever I'm saying here, if you resonate, take from it what serves you or what you might learn in the process. I'm just sharing some of the things I'm learning in not only my journey and through what others are experiencing, that is kind of shedding some more information and light on certain subjects. So it was very empowering for me to own my truth, own my authority, and recognize my truth as a shaman. That one I'll still have to get used to. So anyways, I'm still trying that on size. It's still new for me as owning, as I've said. But another thing I learned this particular night is the role of ethics and morals when you have someone else's best interest in their healing, if you are the facilitator or the healer. And in this particular shaman's case, like by the end of the night, as far as it was around midnight at this point, and he's like, I'm done, the night's coming to a close, everybody's coming off the medicine, it's time for everybody to wrap up and go home, and I'm tired, I want to go home, I got an hour drive, okay? So I was like, okay. So I come back into the room because at a certain point I left the room because there was a lot going on here, and my space honestly didn't really quite feel like my space and the energy that I like to hold within the sanctity of my space. So it did kind of feel like it was taken over. But anyways, I came back into the room, and most people were coming down and were pretty much done. But one particular person had not. And in fact, for her journey was just beginning, because she was essentially in still the spirit realm, based on his facilitation and the medicine kicking in, and where she was really having like dissociative experiences of going in and out of different states of consciousness. And certain points she would be falling on the ground and then coming back to, but she'd be connecting to the consciousness of her inner child self, or yelling at the perpetrator or the entity. But she was doing this in her own inner reality, but physically wasn't having control of her physical self while she was experiencing all of this. So anyways, the shaman ended up leaving, and everybody ended up leaving, when clearly, ethically, in my opinion, he shouldn't have done that, because she clearly was not in the space where she was even physically present in her body to even be done with her journey. But regardless, ethically, I felt that was a poor decision on his part, because that was his claims. He says he goes to war with entities and he clears entities, and meanwhile this girl is still struggling and he's ready to leave. So anyways, obviously it's my space, and like there's no way I was going to leave this girl in this condition, you know. And so I stayed with her, and this time I got to step into my own power and realize I do things a little bit differently than how he might facilitate, and that's okay. And so it taught me a lot about myself, and it was wonderful to be a part of her experience, in which case, which was interesting because not only was she in these disassociative experiences, but they were she tapped into moments where she just started spontaneously oming, like the om mantra, like om, and then she would like fall down and then be in a different state and then come into a different dialogue that she was having, and then she would be like going back to the om, like she was trying to clear this entity, and it seemed like she was being maybe communicated that this oming mantra was meant to help with that. So I found that to be pretty interesting, even though I learned more about this in a client session I ended up doing last night, so I'll come back to that. But we ended up calling in her guides and her angels and loved ones, because I was like, she needs some assistance. And soon enough after that, she then was like, whoa, who is this? Who is this? You know, like having this dialogue. And I'm like, okay, who's here? She's like, there's a female energy. She's trying to come into my body, or she's she's like, I don't know, who is this? So I was like, so now I'm like concerned, you know, like, is this a good being, or is this part of the entity stuff, right? And so I was like, okay, well, ask her, who is she? What is her name? Like, let's get some information here. Can you connect with her? And that's when she's a white light. She's like getting all emotional. She's like, she's here to help me. She's here to help me. And that's when we were communicating. We're like, well, okay, who is she? And she learned that this spirit being was her grandmother. And her grandmother is coming through to help assist her when she was in a state of vulnerability and fear. I mean, she was scared. Her body was doing things that, you know, she wasn't in control of. And she was having this out of body experience all at the same time. But anyways, her grandmother came through, and it was very like powerful, because what she learned through her grandmother is that her trauma, as far as being sexually molested, and I'm sharing this story because she's given me permission. In fact, I have her testimonial that she's given me permission to share. I won't say her name, but the story I feel like is very important, because I feel like a lot of people have similar stories based on what I've heard with clients, and I have I would say a large percentile the people I work with have stories of where they were molested as children, and for whatever reason they seek me out to assist them, but that's the common story that I'm hearing anyways. And in her case, she learned from her grandmother that she was that essentially this pattern of molestation has been happening for generations in her family lineage, and she was the one that was meant to break this cycle, because she learned that all the females in her family lineage had been raped as children. But she also learned that her father and her uncle were as well, including her uncle being the perpetrator in this case for herself. So she got to learn at least, where did it start, where did it originate? And her grandmother asked me to help lead her into a shamanic journey to help her free her inner self, her 3-year-old self who had been molested and had her voice robbed from her, and where she's obviously been impacted ever since her whole life, right? As can be expected. Because there's going to be a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of throat chakra issues of not being able to express this space of shame that comes from something that happened in being a victim to this type of circumstance. So anyways, we led her through, and she was able to go back in time to the original memory where it first started and reclaim her voice to speak up and stop and intervene the original experience from happening, to prevent the cycle of all the repeated rapes that would have taken place afterwards. So she essentially like went and accessed this timeline to rewrite her story, which is a very powerful way to have healing in this spiritual realm, because essentially we're kind of like this holographic the reality we operate in. There's a lot of illusions, and time is one of them that we operate under. But when you are in the space of the astral realms and traveling, time is irrelevant. It is everything. The only real truth of time is this moment in the now. And so you can access any timeline because it is all concurrently, multidimensionally happening in the now, including future probable realities of self, other realities, whether it's your experience of timelines from linearly as what you consider past, present, future. That is kind of an illusion because it's all technically all at the same time, multidimensionally from that higher perspective. But so is your considerations of even other lifetimes, so past lifetimes, right? So it is all accessible in the now, and so you can shift and alter what takes place in that by accessing that timeline. So that's essentially what she did for her current lifetime of what her inner child experienced in childhood. And so she was able to rewrite that story by standing up for herself and preventing her uncle from touching her and having a voice. And it was like retraining her little girl self that she was allowed to have a voice. She was allowed to say no, which was not something she was originally taught by her parents. She was told that she had to do what they say. And in this case, she was also silenced due to the trauma of what happened to her, right? But in revisiting that and reclaiming her inner self and bringing her forward with her, it was a lot like freeing her inner child and bringing that consciousness back with her, where that inner child fragmented in time and dissociated from her and was kind of stuck in that bubble of that time frame of where the traumas originated. And so essentially we're bringing that forward with her. And so I would say it was very successful in what she describes the outcome to be and how it has helped her, even though of course it's a lot for her to process, and that's something that I think is something that's going to take a little bit of time to obviously integrate and process the experience of all of that, and including the lead up of the ceremony that this other shaman facilitated or initiated initially, right? So anyways, that was a really powerful for not only myself, which is something that I'm used to with working with other clients, but normally I facilitate the lead up as well, not just trying to complete the work. So that's something that I found to be really interesting with that I wanted to kind of share. And yes, or I'd say the last couple days, like I mentioned, it seems like there's been more information coming through with the influence of entities in playing a role in your traumas, which I don't believe is a rule of thumb for everybody who's experienced trauma, that there is always an entity attachment or possession, if you will. But I do believe they do influence us in different ways, and there's many gateways that they can do so where they believe they have permission to do so. One of the things that has been communicated in the past is drinking alcohol or participating in any sort of drugs or narcotics is a gateway for them, because if you do not care enough about the sanctity of your body, to them that's considered permission to kind of take over, hence alcohol being called spirits, right? And you feel inebriated where you're not yourself. you might be influenced by these types of energies that are essentially feeding off of you. And a fuel for them is when you are in low vibrations, and especially fear. So fear empowers these beings having a deeper hold over you. So just so you know, fear is one of the bigger manipulations that they may use to essentially attach themselves, is what I'm understanding. Interestingly enough, a couple nights ago, I facilitated a session, and it also had sexual trauma related to it. But when his inner child self went back to the first initial memory where that he felt was traumatic for him, it was very interesting because it didn't go to the sexual trauma. It went to when he was also a few years old, and he actually saw a shadow figure, an entity that he said was like signaling to follow him. He later then, as he revisited these specific traumatic memories that followed, as far as where sexual trauma was involved, he saw the entity in each of those memories as influencing not only him, but the other individual involved, right? So I found that to be very, very interesting as well. So similarly, we had to give him back his power, and he had to remind himself of his own truth, of his own light, to disempower this particular entity having hold over him, because they're very tricky. Another thing that they might get you to do is to dissociate from yourself, disengage, detach from your reality to some extent. And what I learned is pornography, participating in pornography, not just obviously being in pornography, but like participating in watching it. That is also an avenue that these, I guess, entities get a hold of you, right? Because you're participating in something that's kind of vile if you really think about it. It's definitely not a healthy form of sexual expression, even though, you know, it's obviously very prevalent in many households, and it's also very what I understand it to be is it's definitely very disconnecting in any relationship, right? Because you're not using that energy to participate with a partner. You're kind of having, and even so, even if you were sexually, I guess, exploring things with your partner and pornography was in it, it's very it has its own energy signature of being very low vibratory. Let's put it that way. And so it seems like that is another avenue that these entities might implement their influence in your life. So that was one. And then last night, or yesterday, should I say? So I had several clients yesterday, and one of them was part of this original ceremony with the shaman that came here, and so he was already aware that there was an entity involved, where it had more of an influence with telling him lies. But obviously not knowing in his life that he was being fed lies by an entity, but it was coming through what he thought his own thought processes, and there was a lot of self-loathing, self-hating, self-deprecating thoughts and beliefs that he garnered along the way. And so in the ceremony that I mentioned in the beginning, he got to confront this particular entity and was yelling and screaming at it and saying, you're a liar, and all this other stuff, and whatever he gained from that experience. But, you know, obviously it seemed that this entity didn't necessarily leave from that ceremony. So when we did a journey together, we led him into the higher realms, and he felt its presence on his left side, and he described it as like black tentacles, and it was like restricting his jaw and affecting his head, and I think it was creating like a headache for him. So I suggested, why don't we communicate with it first? Let's see what can we learn from it? Like, where did it start? Who is this entity, right? Like, does this entity have a name, you know? And what was interesting, because this is the first time it's happened to me, or I've experienced this in someone's journey, as far as a negative entity is concerned. Whereas channeling, some clients have had the ability to channel higher conscious beings where they are of the light, right? And that's predominantly, like I said, who I mostly work with. It's just recent that it seems that I'm being called to help in dealing with these negative entity energies. But anyways, he started channeling this entity, and because when I was like, well, what's his name? You know, thinking he was gonna communicate with it, the entity started speaking through him, which took me off guard because it was like, my name is like, I was like, oh my God, okay. So, so I started conversing with him and to learn like how did you get a hold of him? You know, like, how are you influencing him right now? Because we operate in a reality of free will. Did he give you his free will? And this entity was like, yes, you know, like he had this distorted voice, and it was like, and he was kind of shaking in his body. And so he's like, yes, he gave him his permission. So I was like, okay, well, is he giving you permission right now? And this entity's like, no, you know, and then I was like, okay, well, where did this originally take place that he gave you permission? He's like, I've been with him for lifetimes. So that I found really interesting, because it wasn't this lifetime that this entity originated in his life as far as being attached to him. It was lifetimes ago that this entity started his influence. So again, like I said, it's really important to go to the origin of where did it start. So I was like, okay, well, which lifetime is this? When did this contract take place? You know, where you gave it, and how did it take place? And he was basically, the entity was describing that it was in the other lifetime where I think it was like, what did he say? Like centaurisms? I don't know. I forget how you I'm not familiar with what it is, but essentially he was a soldier in his particular lifetime. And when he revisited this memory where he saw this influence take place, he was describing it as he was a soldier, and this captain or sergeant or whoever was and the sergeant was basically yelling at him and putting him down and deprecating him, and he was describing as himself feeling weak and getting weaker and weaker the more the sergeant yelled at him. And in that moment, he wished for power. He wanted power. He wanted to be feared. And that is what was the gateway for this entity to trick him in a way to believe that he was going to gain power by allowing himself to, like, essentially team up with this entity. He thought he was going to get power and was going to be feared. Meanwhile, this entity was basically attaching himself and drawing his power from him. And I guess over lifetimes has been this like voice in his head maybe of self-deprecating thoughts, right? Very hateful, negative thoughts about himself that has really sabotaged him in his ability to even attain success in his life, because he felt like he wasn't worthy of it, or he's a failure, and da-da-da-da-da. And so in this lifetime, this entity also played tricks and on influencing him and reinitiating certain traumas to keep him in that low vibratory space of powerlessness, so that he was essentially giving his power away to this entity. And so when I asked this entity, what would it mean if he realized his light, this entity was basically means like, he's like, I don't know, but the entity was kind of saying he was kind of scared because it meant he would cease to exist. So essentially he was attaching himself through the belief that he needs a host to survive. right? Think about parasite energy. They need a host to survive, so they essentially feed off of you, right? I asked this entity if he was afraid of me, and he said yes. He was like, yes. And I was like, is he afraid if this person realizes their power? And he's like, yes, you know, and like same thing. And that's what kind of led into him realizing that if he owned his own power, the person, his own light, his own truth, that light would diminish the influence of the dark. Because remember, if you think in terms of energy, darkness is technically the absence of light. And so if you use your light, you can transmute that dark, and it can only have a hold over you if you have the fuel for it to do so. Remember, the fear and that low vibration that it kind of feeds off of you, what it seems like anyways. But fear is a big one. In this case for him, it seemed to be also largely more to do with feeding into insecurity to some way, and just very limiting beliefs about self, something along more of those lines. But so anyways, as it seems, as of right now, based on his experience, he was able to reclaim his power. And not that this entity has ceased to exist yet as far as an influence, but he's very much, I feel, disempowered. And this person is much more empowered and aware of this entity's influence, so that he can no longer feed it any more energy, and realize when these thought processes come in that they're lies and they're not his truth, and so he can disengage and send it off. And on top of that, so the following client that I had, and she too mentioned how she had experienced stuff in the past with entities, but what she learned is that she was able to smite one of them. And this particular entity that she described that she had experience with had a large part to do with suicidal thoughts. It was like feeding her a lot of suicidal thoughts, where she even at one point, I think, attempted to do so. But since then, as she's embarked on her spiritual journey, I think has been able to release this particular entity. However, what she learned in her journey that we did last night is what she was shown and taught is that what they were saying is the power of the Om mantra, the humming sound, sends like a rippling vibration that actually, since they said a lot of the times that entities can attach to certain frequencies of sound, so disharmonious sound, which is actually also, now that I think about it, has kind of come up in how, I don't know if you guys are aware, but our sound has been hijacked as far as music is concerned, and where they've changed certain tones to be disharmonious. So even though you're listening to music, you're actually listening to a lot of disharmonious frequencies that are non-resonant with you, because it's not a favorable harmonious frequency, because the real frequency has been changed, so that it's actually subliminally sending you negative frequencies, which essentially supposedly entities can connect to certain vibrations, certain sound frequencies. And the Om apparently is a way to it sends like a ripple effect that is very disrupting to these energies, which makes it really hard for them to get near you and to attach to you. And entities in general, they said it could also be entity thought forms. So if you notice, when you're having negative thoughts, they said that this can be used to ripple out and disengage that thought taking hold, by oming, like and having different intonations of that and humming in your throat, and sending that ripple out to dismantle, I think is kind of the phrase I'm looking for, the influence of these beings on you. So I thought that was a really, considering this is what the other particular girl was spontaneously doing in her journey, and it seemed to have been helping. And I got to learn a little bit more about this last night. So I just really wanted to share all this information. Like I said, I'm processing so much all the time, and I'm being taught a lot at the same time, and besides what I connect others to facilitate as well. But again, their experience is unique to them. My job is mostly to be a facilitator and help them navigate their experience, so that they get what their intentions, what they're seeking. And so my job is to essentially facilitate, like a bridge to connect to those higher spiritual realms where they can address either their shadow work, or get answers to the questions, or find resolution, access timelines that aren't serving them, or that they need to learn from to bring forward. Really, anything's possible, but these are some of the things that have just, like I said, come up in the last 2 weeks, and I just really wanted to share it while it was fresh. Yeah, I don't know if you have any questions, thoughts. I would love your feedback. I know there's a lot of fear around, I guess, the ideas that entities exist. But just as much as, like I said, we work with light as well. There's light beings, there's loved ones, there's higher consciousness, but we'd be a fool to think that there wasn't the duality or polarity of that, just because as there is light, there is also dark, right? But you can learn from both, but it's a matter of, do you choose your light? And that's what something has been a big theme in people healing, is realizing that they have the free will to choose their light, and that is your power, and reclaiming your power. So anyways, hope the video was helpful. If you are seeking any type of healing work to address any of these things, or you resonate with any of this material, this is just one area or factor that is possible for some people, of what they might need help with. I would be happy to be of service to you if you resonate. So be sure to, I guess, reach out, private message me, or you can visit my website at www.holistic-vitality.com, and the holistic is spelled with a W. So awesome. Well, I hope you guys have an awesome day, and hopefully we might be connecting soon.